Tonight, we are going to slow down together and rest inside some of the oldest stories of the Christian faith. Stories about a mind that will not stop, a mind that circles the same worry long after the day has quietly ended. Stories that remind you of something you may have forgotten, that the mind can be quieted, not by fighting it, not by working harder to control it, but by resting inside a peace that is older than you are tonight, a peace you did not have to earn. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is right now and where you are listening from. It is quietly comforting to notice who else is awake tonight, carrying their own tired thoughts into this same darkness. You are not the only one. You do not need to know anything about Scripture to listen tonight. You do not need any particular belief. You only need to be here. Let your body rest now. Let it settle into the quiet grace of being held for a while. There is nothing to figure out tonight. There is nowhere else to be, nothing to solve before you are allowed to sleep. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Chapel. Let us begin. There is a story told in the oldest Gospels about a small wooden boat, a lake at evening, and a teacher who could sleep through anything. It is a scene the fishermen remembered for the rest of their lives, not because of what they did in that boat, but because of what they saw at the back of it. They saw a man asleep in the middle of the storm, and it changed something in them forever. The lake was called Galilee, a wide, low body of water tucked between the hills, warm on its surface and cold underneath. Anyone who lived there knew that the wind could turn on you without warning. One moment the water was flat as glass. The next, it was breaking over the sides of the boat. The fishermen who worked those waters grew up learning the sound of the wind before it came. That evening the teacher had been speaking to a great crowd on the shore. He had been speaking for hours, speaking to farmers and mothers and the sick and the tired, speaking to people who had walked a long way just to hear him say something that would let them sleep that night. When the sun began to lower over the hills, he turned to his friends. He said quietly, "Let us cross to the other side." They pushed the boat out into the water. The sky was already changing color, a pale gold along the ridges, deep blue overhead. The disciples were tired. They had spent the whole day making sure the crowd could see him, could hear him, could reach him. Their bodies were sore. Their minds were still running, still turning over the day, still counting who had been fed and who had been missed. You may know this kind of tiredness, the kind where the body wants to lie down, but the mind keeps working anyway, refusing to close its own doors. The kind where you close your eyes and the day starts playing again behind your forehead, scene by scene. Every conversation reconsidered, every small mistake reopened. That is the kind of tiredness the fishermen carried into the boat that night, oars in hand, thoughts still running ahead of them. The teacher walked to the back of the boat. He lay down on a cushion. He closed his eyes, and within moments he was asleep. Notice that. A simple thing. He lay down, and he slept. He did not make a plan for the night crossing. He did not check the wind, or count the clouds along the western ridge, or ask the fishermen how the water looked to them. He simply lay down on the cushion at the back of the boat and let the boat be a boat, and let sleep be sleep. Something in him could rest that easily. Something in him already trusted the whole crossing to something larger than the wind. They rowed out into the middle of the lake. The wind began to rise. At first it was only a small shift, a cool breath against their faces. Then the surface of the water stopped being smooth. Small ridges formed, then larger ones, then waves. The kind of waves that lift the front of a boat and drop it heavily on the other side. The disciples had seen storms before. Most of them were fishermen. They knew what a bad night on this lake could do. But this storm was rising faster than the others they remembered, faster than seemed possible. The wind pressed down on them from the hills. The waves climbed higher. Water began to come over the sides of the boat, cold water pouring onto their feet, then their knees, then everywhere. They started bailing, one of them at the sail, wrestling the wet rope with cold fingers, another at the ropes near the front, trying to keep the boat from turning sideways into the waves, a third with a wooden bucket, throwing water back into the water in the oldest, most useless gesture there is. Their hands moved as fast as they could move. Their minds moved faster than their hands. Every possibility was already unfolding in their heads before the next wave hit. And in the back of the boat, on the cushion, the teacher was still asleep. You can imagine what that did to them. They were fighting for the boat, fighting for their lives. And the one they had followed here, the one they had trusted, the one they had left everything for, was sleeping through it, his head resting quietly, his breathing slow, his body loose against the wood. At some point, one of them could not take it anymore. He crossed to the back of the boat. He shook the teacher's shoulder. He said, "Master, do you not care that we are perishing?" That was the mind speaking. That was the mind that will not stop. The mind that felt the wind, saw the water rising, remembered every drowning story the fishermen had heard as children. The mind that ran ahead and pictured the boat splitting, and their bodies in the cold water, and the morning coming and finding them gone. The mind that could not rest, because it believed the whole boat depended on how hard it worked. The teacher opened his eyes. He did not scold them. He did not tell them they should have known better. He simply stood up in the boat. He looked at the wind and the sea, and he said 3 words, very quietly. "Peace, be still." And the wind stopped, just like that, as if it had been waiting to be told, as if it had always been listening for a voice it recognized. The water flattened, the ropes went slack, the boat, which had been thrown from wave to wave only a moment before, now rocked softly like a cradle on the quiet surface. The lake became a mirror again. Above them the sky was clearing. A few early stars had come out along the darkening rim of the world. The disciples had never heard peace spoken like that. They had heard the word many times. Peace at the end of a blessing, peace at the beginning of a greeting. But this was peace as a command, peace given, not wished, peace that entered the world through a spoken word and settled the water immediately. The disciples stood in the boat and did not speak. Their hands were still wet, their clothes were still cold, but the storm was gone. The teacher turned to them, still calm, still quiet. He asked them, gently, "Why were you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Notice that he did not ask what they had done wrong. He did not tell them to try harder next time. He only asked them to notice what kind of storm they had believed in, to notice who had been in the boat with them the whole time. There is a way of hearing this story that misses the point. It is easy to hear it as a story about the storm, about the miracle, about the wind stopping when the teacher spoke. But the fishermen who told this story afterward did not tell it that way. They told it as a story about the one who slept. Because the one who slept was the one who trusted. He was not asleep because he did not care. He was asleep because he already knew the ending. He knew who was in the boat. He knew who was holding the whole lake. And so his body could rest, his mind could go quiet. He could lay his head on a cushion in the back of a boat, in the middle of a rising storm, and he could sleep. That is the kind of sleep the disciples wanted. That is the kind of sleep you may be wanting tonight. not the sleep of someone who has arranged everything just right, not the sleep of someone who has solved every worry before laying their head down, but the deep of someone who is held. Who knows they are held? Who has stopped rowing against the wind for one night and has finally let the boat be carried by something larger than themselves? You may notice that your mind right now is a little like those fishermen, still bailing, still counting waves, still turning over what tomorrow might bring. That is all right. The mind has been trained to do that for a long time. It does not stop easily. But you do not have to be the one who quiets the wind tonight. That is not your work. That has never been your work. The wind will do what the wind does, and the water will do what the water does. And you can lay your head down anyway, because you are not alone in the boat. There is a grace in this story that is easy to miss on a first hearing. The disciples did not have to earn the calm that came over the water. They did not have to become better fishermen. They did not have to prove they were worthy of a quiet sea. They did not even have to stop being afraid. The teacher spoke, and the water grew still. The peace was given, not bought, not won, just given. That is what grace does. It arrives before you are ready for it. That is how peace of this kind arrives in a life. It is not something you build by working harder on your own mind. It is not something you achieve by finally solving the worry that is keeping you awake. It arrives quietly. It arrives when you notice that someone is already awake in the boat with you, and you are allowed to rest. Feel the boat under you now. Feel the rocking gentle. Feel the water below, wide and dark and deep, and no longer angry. Feel the cushion in the back of the boat, where a head can be laid down. Feel the quiet returning to the surface of everything. Feel the ropes going slack. Feel the wind letting go of your face at last. The storm can rage on the outside if it needs it to. The mind can turn a little longer if it needs to turn. None of that has to end before you are allowed to sleep. You do not have to solve the wind. You do not have to fix the water. You are already held. You have always been held. There is a grace holding the whole lake, and tonight, that is enough. Tonight, you can rest as the teacher rested, slowly, deeply, without needing to know how the story ends. Consider what happened after the wind stopped. The boat did not turn back. It did not sail home. It kept going, quietly, across the lake, toward the other shore. The disciples were still cold. Their clothes were still wet. Their hands still ached from the rope. But the water was calm now, and the boat was moving, and the teacher was awake beside them at the back of the vessel. He did not lecture them the rest of the way across. He did not remind them what had just happened. He simply sat with them in the boat, in the quiet, while they finished the crossing. That is often how peace continues after a storm. It does not announce itself with speeches. It does not explain what it just did. It only sits with you, quietly, while the water goes flat and the boat moves and the far shore slowly grows closer. That is the part of the story the fishermen also remembered, not just the calming, the company that stayed after. By the time they reached the other side, the sky was turning gray at the edges. Dawn was not far away. The disciples were tired in a way they had never been tired before, not because of the rowing, because of what they had seen, because of the strangeness of being in a boat with someone who could speak to the wind. They pulled the boat up onto the sand quietly. They walked out onto the beach, and the teacher walked with them, still calm, still without demand. You may notice something here. The people who lived through the storm did not talk about it much afterward. They did not turn it into a lesson. They did not use it as evidence. They only carried it quietly for the rest of their lives, as a memory of what kind of teacher they had. as a memory of what kind of night could be survived, as a memory of the sleep at the back of the boat. You are welcome to carry it that way too tonight, not as a lesson, not as a proof, only as a memory of someone who could sleep through the wind because he already knew who was holding the lake. Let us rest inside another story. There is a smaller moment tucked into one of the oldest Gospels. It happens at the end of a long day on a hillside when the light is already going soft over the grass. The teacher had been speaking to a crowd for hours. He had been answering questions he had answered many times before. He had been listening to people tell him what was wrong in their villages, in their bodies, in their houses. And when the crowd began to thin and the sun began to lower, he said something that the fishermen who followed him remembered word for the rest of their lives. He said, "Come to me, all of you who are tired, all of you who are carrying too much, and I will give you rest." That was all. That was the whole invitation. It was not a lecture. It was not a plan. It was the sound of someone who had noticed something the crowd had not yet noticed about itself. He had noticed that they were tired. Not the tired of a long walk. That kind of tired is honest, and it usually sleeps well. He had noticed the other tired, the one that stays after the walking is done, the one that keeps working inside the chest after the body has lain down, the one you may know very well, since it is the reason many people are awake at this hour. There was a woman who had been standing at the back of the crowd that day. There is a story sometimes told about her, though her name is not remembered. She had walked into the town from her village that morning, carrying two things. One of them was a basket. The basket had bread in it, and a little cheese, and a small jar of oil, because she was going to trade it in the town. The basket was heavy on her arm, but she was used to that. She had carried heavier things. The other thing she was carrying, no one could see. It sat somewhere behind her eyes. It sat in the tightness at the top of her shoulders. It was the shape of a worry she had been carrying for months. About a son who had gone north for work and had not written. About a piece of land the neighbors were saying belonged to them now. About the small pains in her body that came at night and would not let her sleep. That kind of weight does not come off when you set the basket down. She had heard the teacher was going to be in the town that day. She had come partly to trade, and partly because someone in her village had told her that people had felt lighter after listening to him. She did not fully believe it. She had heard many teachers. She had listened to many sermons. Most of them told her, in one way or another, to try harder, to be better, to pray more, or fear more, or work more. She had done all of that already. She was already trying as hard as she knew how. Her mind that morning would not stop, even as she walked, even as she set out the little jar of oil to sell, even as she listened. Her mind kept going back to the sun, to the land, to the pains at night. Her mind was doing what minds do. It was trying to solve everything at once, and it was failing. At the back of the crowd, she barely heard the teacher for the first hour. Her thoughts were louder than his voice. She kept looking down at her sandals, at the dust on them, at the small stone that had gotten into one of the straps. She almost turned to leave several times. But then something in his tone shifted. She looked up. He was no longer answering questions. He was no longer explaining anything. He was standing on the hillside with the low light behind him, and he was speaking directly to the tired. He was not speaking to the wise or the righteous or the strong. He was speaking to the ones who had come with baskets on their arms and heaviness behind their eyes. The mothers who had been up before the sun, the old men whose knees ached on the long walk, the young men who had already lost more than they wanted to say. He was speaking to all of them the same way, as if the tiredness itself was the qualification, as if being weary was, for once, enough to be welcomed. "Come to me," he said, "all of you who are weary, all of you who are carrying too much, and I will give you rest." She heard it as if he had said her name, not because he had seen her at the back. She was quite sure he had not, but because it was the first time in a long time that anyone had spoken, as if her tiredness was the thing worth addressing. Not her failures, not her efforts, not what she should have done differently. Just her tiredness, as if the tiredness itself was allowed to be spoken to, as if it was the honored guest and not the embarrassing one. Notice what he did not say. He did not say, "Come to me if you have your life in order." He did not say, "Come to me once you have solved the worry that is following you." He did not say, "Come to me when your mind is finally quiet." He said, "Come to me tired, come as you are. Come carrying the whole thing, and I will give you rest." That word rest is a small word. It is only 4 letters, but she felt it settle somewhere in her chest that had not been settled in a long time. Something in her recognized it the way a body recognizes water it has been thirsty for. She stood there in the fading light for a long time after he had stopped speaking. The crowd began to move around her, breaking up in slow groups, heading back toward their villages, their homes, their beds. She stayed still. The basket was still on her arm. The worry was still behind her eyes. Nothing about her circumstances had changed. Her son had still not written. The neighbors still claimed the land. Her body still had its small pains. But something had shifted anyway. She had been given permission to be tired without being told to fix it. She had been offered rest without being told to earn it. That is a rare thing to be offered. It is offered so rarely, in fact, that when it comes, the mind almost does not know what to do with it. You may know exactly what she felt. You may have been offered a great deal of advice in your life, a great deal of self-improvement, a great deal of instruction on how to be better, and you may have followed most of it, and you may still be tired. That does not mean you have failed. It means you have been carrying something no amount of trying was going to lift. The teacher on the hillside was not offering another thing to try. He was offering the end of trying, not the end of your life, not the end of your work, just the end of the belief that all of it depends on how hard you can carry. That is what grace is. Grace is what arrives when you finally set the basket down, not because you are giving up, but because you are finally letting someone else hold what you were never meant to hold alone. The woman walked home that evening in the dusk. The basket was empty by then, since she had traded her bread and cheese and oil, but her arm still felt lighter than it had that morning. Not because the basket was gone, because the other thing, the one no one could see, had shifted a little inside her. She was still carrying it, but she was no longer carrying it as if she were the only one who could carry it. The road home passed through olive groves. The trees were dark shapes against a sky that had gone lavender. Somewhere a dog was barking, then stopped. She could smell wood smoke from the small houses further down the valley. Her sandals scuffed softly against the packed earth of the road, and for the first time in months, she noticed the walking itself, the rhythm of it, the way one foot found the ground and then the other, the way the body knew how to keep going without being managed by the mind. That is the beginning of quiet in a mind, not the disappearance of the worry, but the loosening of your grip on it. Consider how many times in your life you have set a basket down without realizing you were carrying anything. A day at work ends. You come home. you take off your shoes. Somewhere in that transition, without ceremony, something you had been holding all day quietly leaves your shoulders. You do not name it. You do not thank anyone for it. You only notice, later, that dinner tastes better than it should, or that your body has softened in a way it had not been softening in the office. That is a small basket setting down. That is a small grace of daily life. It happens more than you know. The woman on the hillside had a bigger basket to set down, but the shape of the setting down was the same. She did not have to force it. She did not have to earn it. She only had to hear someone say, "Come to me tired," and her arm, without her deciding to, loosened its grip. You may have larger baskets tonight than the ones you set down at the door. You may have baskets that have been on your arm for years. That is all right. The teacher on the hillside is speaking to those too. Not just the small ones, especially the big ones, especially the ones that you have almost stopped noticing that you are still carrying. Notice this too. He did not tell her the worry would go away. He did not promise her the sun would right. He did not say the neighbors would give the land back. He offered her something different. He offered her rest inside the worry. Rest while the worry continued to exist. Rest that was not conditional on the worry being solved first. That is the peace this story hands to you tonight. It is not the peace of a life without wind. It is not the peace of a mind that has finished with all its questions. It is the peace of someone who is held while the questions go on. The peace of a shoulder finally allowed to lower. The peace of a body allowed to lie down without earning the right to lie down. You do not have to be less tired than you are to receive it. You do not have to be more faithful than you are. You do not have to have your mind in order. You only have to hear the offer. Come to me, all of you who are weary, and I will give you rest. Hear it now, if you have not heard it lately, not as a command, not as a challenge, as an offer, as grace already extended before you knew to ask for it. There is somewhere in you tonight that is still standing at the back of that crowd, with a basket on your arm and a worry behind your eyes. And somewhere on the hillside, in the low gold light, there is still someone speaking to the tired, not to the strong, not to the finished, to the tired, to you. Set the basket down slowly. You will not lose what is in it. The basket has always been safer than you thought. You are held tonight. You have always been held, and you are allowed to rest. There is another story that points to the same thing. There is another small scene tucked into the Gospels. It happens in a house. In the late afternoon, when a meal is being prepared and a guest has come, and the light through the doorway is turning gold. The village was called Bethany. It sat on the far side of a low ridge outside Jerusalem. Nothing important happened there most days. It was a place of small houses, small courtyards, small gardens with fig trees and herbs. A place where you could hear your neighbors talking through the walls, and where everybody knew whose lamp was still burning at night. In one of those houses lived two sisters. Their names were Martha and Mary. There was also a brother, but he is not in this scene. This scene is only about the two sisters and the guest, and what happened between the kitchen and the sitting room while the sun went down. The teacher had come to their house that afternoon. He had come with some of his friends. He was tired from the road. He had been walking most of the day. Martha had opened the door and welcomed him inside and said all the right things the way a host is supposed to. She had shown him to the place where the mats were laid out, and then she had gone to the kitchen, because there was suddenly a meal to prepare for a guest who was known to bring several friends, and the bread was not yet finished, and the water was not yet drawn, and the small oil lamps were not yet lit. You may already know Martha, not because you have read this story before, but because there is a Martha in most houses. There is a Martha in most minds, in fact. Martha is the part of you that keeps track, the part that notices what has not yet been done and lists it and begins on it and does not sit down until the last thing on the list has been finished. Martha is not a bad person to have inside you. Martha is the reason meals are cooked. She is the reason guests are welcomed. She is the reason the house has clean water in it. Without Martha, nothing would happen at all. It would only ever be talked about. But Martha has a problem, and if you are honest, you may have this same problem tonight. Martha cannot stop. Even when the list is done, she is already making the next list. Even when she sits down for a moment, she is scanning the room for what she might have missed. Her body may be still, but her mind is already back in the kitchen, worrying about the bread. In the sitting room, meanwhile, was Mary. Mary was Martha's sister. She had not gone to the kitchen. She had not gone to draw the water. She had sat down on the floor near the teacher, and she was listening to him talk, just listening, quiet, attentive. Her hands were in her lap. From the kitchen, Martha could see her sister through the doorway. She could see her sitting there, doing nothing, while the bread was still not finished, and the water was still not drawn, and the small oil lamps were still not lit. Something in Martha began to burn. It was not a big fire at first. It was the small kind, the kind you have felt many times in your own house, or your own workplace, or your own family. It was the feeling of doing all the work while someone else sat comfortably in the sitting room. It was the feeling of being the one who holds the whole thing together, alone. She could have said nothing. She could have finished the meal. She could have let it pass, but her mind that afternoon would not let it pass. Her mind kept going back through the doorway to look at her sister on the floor. Her mind rehearsed the little speech she wanted to make. Her mind was doing what minds do when they are tired and unrecognized. It was building a case. At some point, she could not hold it anymore. She wiped her hands on the cloth at her waist. She walked out of the kitchen. She stood in the doorway of the sitting room, and she said, to the teacher, not to her sister, "Master, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to come and help me." Notice that she did not go to her sister. She went to the guest. That is how Martha's mind was working. She wanted the guest to arbitrate. She wanted the visitor to say what she already believed, that it was unfair, that Mary should be up, that the work should be shared. The teacher looked at her. He did not scold her. He did not defend Mary. He did not tell her she was wrong to be tired. He simply said her name, not once, but twice, very softly. "Martha, Martha." She stood in the doorway with the cloth still in her hands. Something in the way he said her name made her stop rehearsing the speech. Something in the way he said it twice made her feel for a moment that he could see the whole of her. Not just the anger, not just the work, the whole tired shape of a woman who had been carrying a house on her back for a long time. He said, "You are worried and troubled about many things, but only one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen the good portion, and it will not be taken from her." He did not say more than that. He did not tell her the meal did not matter. He did not tell her to leave the bread. He did not shame her for her working. He only pointed out something she had not been able to see from the kitchen, that there was another way of being in the house, a way of being that did not require holding everything, a way of being that trusted the meal would come, one way or another, and sat down anyway. Notice what he offered her. He offered her permission. Permission to stop. Permission to leave one thing undone. Permission to sit on the floor next to her sister if she wanted to, even with bread still in the bowl and water still in the well. Martha did not have to earn that permission. She did not have to finish everything first. She did not have to prove that she deserved to rest. The rest was already available to her. It had always been available to her. She had just not believed she was allowed to receive it. You may recognize this too. You may be someone who has been raised to finish first and rest after, to earn your quiet by completing everything. Most people are raised that way. It is not a failure of yours. It is simply what most of us were taught. But the teacher was offering Martha a different order of things. Rest first, he was saying, or at least rest at some point that is not tied to the last item on the list, because the list, if you are being honest, is never actually finished. There is always another loaf, always another lamp, always another thing the mind will insist has not yet been done. That is the trap of a Martha kind of mind. Not that it does too much, but that it believes rest is only allowed at the end, and there is no end. Grace is what comes in through the doorway when someone tells you the truth. That the end you are working toward does not exist. That the meal will happen. That the bread will bake. That the water will be there. And that you are allowed to sit down before any of it is finished. Notice the small kindness of him saying her name twice. Martha, Martha. He did not say it as a correction. He said it as recognition. He was seeing her. Not the meal she was making. Not the sister she was resenting. Her, the whole tired woman in the doorway. That is often how peace enters a mind, not through a solution to the problem. Through someone seeing you. Through the softening that happens when you realize you have been seen for who you are, and not for what you have finished. There is a version of this story that hears it as a rebuke, as if Martha was wrong to work and Mary was right to sit. That is not what he said. He did not tell Martha that her working was bad. He did not tell her to become Mary. He told her that only one thing was needed, and he named what that one thing was without saying the word for it. The one thing was the presence in the room. The one thing was the guest. The one thing was the invitation to sit close and stop performing and be held for a moment by someone who was not asking anything of her. You may have been performing for a long time. You may have been the Martha of your family, your job, your household, your friendships. You may have been the one holding everything together, silently resenting how alone the holding feels. If that is you tonight, hear him say your name twice, softly, in the doorway. Not as a scold, as a seeing. He is not asking you to fail at your responsibilities. He is only pointing out that the responsibility to hold everything alone was never actually yours. The bread does not depend on you. The lamps do not depend on you. Even the meal, if you are honest, was going to happen without you being frantic about it. You have been frantic because you love the people who eat the bread. That love is not the problem. The problem is the belief that the love has to look like frantic. Love can also look like sitting down. Love can also look like resting. Come out of the kitchen for a moment tonight. Let the bread be. Let the water be. Sit down on the floor of the sitting room, in your imagination, near a guest who is not in a hurry, who does not want you to prove anything, who is only glad you have joined him. Feel the way the muscles in your shoulders begin to lower when you stop rehearsing. Feel how the mind, which had been building its case, now has nothing more to say. Feel the small relief of being seen for the tired person you are, without being asked to be anyone else. That is rest, not the collapse at the end of an endless list, but the quiet permission to leave something undone on purpose, because you have been welcomed into a room where the doing was never the point. You are allowed to sit down tonight. You are allowed to leave the last thing unfinished. You are held by something larger than the list. This is not the peace of an empty house. This is not the peace of a finished chore. It is the peace of being held before the work is done. The list will still be there tomorrow. Some of it will get done. Some of it will not. And you will still be loved either way. That is grace. It does not wait for the bread to bake. It arrives while it is still in the bowl. Hear him say your name in the doorway now, softly, twice, the way he said Martha's. See how the fire in your chest begins to go out. See how the cloth falls slowly from your hands. See how the sitting room, from where you are standing, looks less like a place where nothing is happening, and more like a place where someone has saved you a seat on the floor. Sit down. The meal will keep. The house will keep. You are held. You are allowed. This is not a lesson. It is not a task. It is a grace already extended to you tonight, right where you are, before the work is done. Consider Martha for a moment after the teacher had spoken. The story does not tell us what she did next. It does not tell us whether she came into the sitting room and sat down beside her sister. It does not tell us whether she went back to the kitchen. That silence in the story is deliberate. It leaves room for her and for you, because both possibilities are all right. She could sit down. She could go back to the bread. What had changed was not what she did with her hands. What had changed was that she had been seen, and a person who has been seen carries herself differently, whether she is stirring the pot or sitting on the floor. You may not sit down tonight in a literal way. You may still get up in the morning and do all the things you were going to do. That is fine. That is not the failure of this parable. The parable is not asking you to stop working. It is only asking you to notice that the working was never the whole of you. That someone in the room knows your name twice, softly, and is not measuring you by the bread. That you are welcome in the sitting room whenever you decide to walk through the doorway. The Gospels hold another small moment that says the same thing. There is a scene from the same hillside teachings that the fishermen kept telling for the rest of their lives. It is not the famous part. It is not the part that people painted on walls or wrote in gold letters over doorways. It is a smaller part, a quieter part, the part where the teacher stopped talking about the law and stopped talking about the prophets and pointed at a bird. The morning had started early. People had walked in from every direction to hear him. Some had come from villages half a day away. They had left their sheep with a cousin or their looms with a neighbor. They were sitting on the slope now, along the low ridge, in the grass. The sun was climbing behind them, warming the backs of their necks. The wild flowers on the hillside were open. A few birds were moving in the air above the crowd, doing what birds do in the morning, which is nothing in particular and everything at once. There was a man near the middle of the crowd who was not really listening. His body was there. His eyes were open. But his mind was somewhere else. His mind was in the small stone room of his house, back in his village, where a small pile of coins sat under a loose floor tile. That pile was not going to last through the next month. He knew it. He had counted it 3 times already that morning, before the sun came up. His wife had been sick, not badly, but enough to keep her from the market for 2 weeks, and 2 weeks was more than they could afford. He had been going over the numbers for days now. He had been rehearsing every possible outcome. He had been picturing what he would say to his brother-in-law, whom he did not want to ask for help. He had been picturing what he would say to the man who owned the small piece of land at the edge of the village, whose patience with him was running out. You may know this kind of man, not because you have met him, because you have been him. Perhaps you are him tonight. the one whose body is lying in bed, whose lamp is out, but whose mind is still under a floor tile counting coins, rehearsing conversations that have not happened, picturing months that are not here yet. This is the mind that ensures nothing gets solved, because the ensuring itself is what keeps you awake, and the awake mind, in the dark, becomes very sure that its rehearsing is what is holding the whole life together. If you stop counting the coins tonight, the mind says everything will collapse. So the mind keeps counting, and nothing changes, but you are tired. The man on the hillside was doing exactly this. He was mid-count, mid-rehearsal, when the teacher stopped talking. Not stopped in a big way. He simply paused. He looked past the crowd, up into the air, and he raised one hand slowly toward a bird. A small brown bird, nothing special, the kind of bird you see every morning without noticing. It was hovering for a moment, then dropping down toward the grass, then back up, then down again, looking for seeds or an insect or whatever birds look for at that hour. "Look," the teacher said, "look at that bird." The whole crowd looked, even the man who had been under the floor tile in his mind, his head turned. The teacher said, "That bird does not sow, and it does not reap. It does not put grain in a barn. It does not count what it has, or worry what it will not have tomorrow. And yet, look, it is fed. Every morning, it is fed. Something is feeding that bird that is not the bird itself." He said it quietly, almost casually, like someone pointing out a small, ordinary thing that had been overlooked. Then he turned slightly. He pointed to the wildflowers on the slope below the crowd. Small purple and white lilies, growing in scattered patches, blowing gently in the breeze. "And look at these," he said, "these lilies. They do not spin cloth. They do not weave. They do nothing to become beautiful. And yet even the greatest king in his greatest robe was never dressed as well as one of these small flowers on this hillside." There was a long pause. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere below, a goat bell rang once. The teacher looked back at the crowd. He was not smiling in a big way. He was just looking at them softly. He said, "If this is how the field is dressed, and this is how the bird is fed, do you really think your own life is being forgotten? Do you really believe you have been left to figure it out alone?" The man near the middle of the crowd did not move. Something in his chest had gone very quiet. He was still thinking about the coins under the tile. But the thinking had lost some of its grip. He was seeing the bird instead. He was seeing the small purple flowers below, and he was noticing, for the first time in months, that neither of them had been counting anything. Notice what the teacher did not say. He did not say the man's problem was small. He did not say the coins would multiply. He did not say the wife would be well by morning. He did not say the rent would be paid. He said something different. He said the field is dressed. He said the bird is fed. He said the world is being tended by something that has not left you out. That was the whole invitation, not a solution, not a promise about tomorrow. An invitation to notice that you are inside a larger tending than your own mind. You may not have thought of it this way, but if you look at your own life honestly, most of what has kept you alive so far, you did not arrange. You did not arrange the beating of your heart. You did not arrange the breathing that goes on while you sleep. You did not arrange the coming of the light in the morning, or the way food finds its way to your table, or the strangers whose small choices all week long made your life possible without your knowing. The bird did not arrange the seed either. The lily did not arrange the color of its own petals. And you are, if the teacher is to be believed, worth more than the bird, worth more than the flower, held by the same tending, and even more so. There is a way the mind hears this and gets defensive. It says, "But the bird does not have rent." It says, "The lily does not have a sick wife." It says, "The situations are not the same." And of course they are not. But the point is not that your worry is unreasonable. The point is that the tending is real. The tending is not conditional on the mind holding it together. You do not have to feed yourself the way the bird feeds itself. You do not have to weave your own clothes the way the lily grows. There is a whole system of grace running through the world that includes you. Whether you notice it or not, whether you thank it or not, whether you sleep tonight or not. There is a peace that comes when you finally believe this. Not a peace that makes the coins multiply. A peace that lets you close the tile and go to bed anyway. A peace that trusts the morning will come, and the wife will be well, or she will not, and the rent will be paid, or a way will open. And either way, you are not the one holding the whole thing. The mind will resist this peace at first. The mind has been guarding the coin pile for so long that it does not know how to hand it over. That is all right. You do not have to hand it over all at once. You only have to notice for a moment that the bird is fed, that the lily is dressed, that the tending is real, and that you are inside it. The teacher on the hillside did not tell the man to stop counting. He only pointed at a bird. He only pointed at a flower. That is all the mind ever really needs. A place to rest its eyes on something outside its own rehearsal. A small opening through which grace can enter. That is what a story like this is for, not to solve your worry. To open a small window in the room where the worry is sitting, to let a little light in, to remind the mind that outside the room, the bird is still eating and the lily is still growing, and neither of them is doing anything you should feel bad for not doing. Feel the hillside now in your imagination, the dry grass under an open sky, the warm slope, the birds moving in the morning air above you. Feel the wind that moves through the lilies and does not ask them to hold anything. Feel the way the teacher's voice is soft and not urgent, and not asking you to fix your situation before you are allowed to lie down. His voice is not going anywhere. The hillside is not going anywhere. You are welcome to stay as long as your body needs to stay. You are held tonight. You have always been held. The tending is not something you have to earn. It is not something you have to remember. It goes on whether you sleep or do not, whether you count or do not, whether you worry or do not. The bird is fed, the lily is dressed, and you are inside the same tending, held by the same grace, wearing the same quiet clothing of provision that was never your own arrangement. Sit inside that thought for a moment. Settle inside the tending. Lie down without any promise about the coin pile, without any promise about the morning. Rest simply because the field is still dressed and the bird is still fed, and grace has not stopped moving through the world tonight, even in this house, even in this room, even in your tired body. Set the coin pile down for the night. Let the tile settle. Let the numbers wait. The morning will come. It always does. And you are allowed to meet it rested. Consider the man on the hillside again for a moment. He did not stand up and shout that his worry was gone. He did not run home and announce that he understood everything now. He simply sat there for a while longer as the teacher moved on to speak of other things. He watched the small bird come back and hover over the grass again. He watched a lily bend slowly in the wind, then straighten. He did not think in words about what had happened to him. He only felt something in the tightness at the top of his shoulders begin, quietly, to lower. When the crowd finally broke up and he walked home along the dust road that afternoon, his mind was still going. It still rehearsed the coins under the floor tile. It still worried about the wife. Nothing about the outside of his life had changed. But now, alongside the worrying, there was a small other voice, a small other picture, a bird hovering, a lily bending, the soft raised hand of the teacher pointing at them. He went home, and he ate a small supper with his family, and he sat for a while by the door watching the light go. Then he lay down. His mind began, as it always did, to count the coins. But this time, in the middle of the counting, the bird came back to him. He saw it hovering. He remembered that it did not sow, and something in his body, without being told to, took a slower breath. Something in his chest, without being asked to, softened. He slept a little that night, not perfectly, but a little. That is often how these small parables work. Not by fixing your worry, by giving your mind something else to look at while the worry runs its course. A bird, a flower, a raised hand on a hillside, a sentence that outlasts the noise of the day. The mind will still count the coins, but it will also see the bird now, and gradually, over many nights, the bird begins to take up more of the room and the coins less. There is another story that points to the same tending. There is a very small parable in the oldest gospel. It is only a few sentences long. Most people read past it quickly because it does not have a miracle in it, and it does not have a crowd in it, and it does not have anyone being healed. It is only a story about a man who plants seed and then goes home and sleeps. The teacher used to tell it like this. He would say, "The kingdom of God is like a man who scatters seed on the ground. And then he goes to bed at night, and he gets up in the morning, and he does this for many nights and many mornings. And meanwhile, without him knowing how, the seed sprouts. It grows. First a small stalk, then a head of grain, then the full ripe wheat ready to be cut. He does not know how any of that happens. He only knows that it does. And when the wheat is ready, he takes his sickle, and he goes out to the field because the harvest has come." That is the whole story. That is all he said. You may have missed how strange it is the first time you heard it, because at the center of it is a man who does nothing, a man who sleeps, a man who wakes up and goes about his day, a man who is, quite deliberately, not the reason the seed is growing. The seed grows without him. There was a farmer near a small village who fit this story exactly. Not because he was famous, because he was ordinary. There is a story sometimes told about him, though nobody remembers his name. He had a small piece of land at the edge of the village. It sloped gently down toward a dry creek bed. In the good years, the creek ran until early summer. In the bad years, it dried up before spring. He had inherited the land from his father, who had inherited it from his father. 3 generations had planted seed on that same slope and eaten bread from it, and buried each other beneath its terraces at the far end. The farmer had a wife and 2 young children, and a bent old grandmother who lived in the house with them. His days were long. He was up before the sun. He worked the land until the light was gone. He did what farmers do. He plowed, he weeded, he watched the sky, he watched the sheep. And in the season of planting, he walked up and down the slope with a small bag at his side, scattering seed by hand, the way his father had taught him. But this farmer had a problem, and it may be a problem you recognize. The farmer could not stop watching the seed after he had planted it. He would go to sleep at night, and he would lie in the dark, and his mind would drift out through the wall and up the slope and into the field. He would picture the seed underground. He would wonder if it had absorbed enough water. He would wonder if a rat had gotten into that corner of the field. He would wonder if the birds had picked at the row nearest the road. He would wonder if the soil at the top of the slope was too rocky. He would wonder and wonder and wonder. He was not a lazy man. He was a good farmer. But he had come to believe, somewhere along the way, that the growing was his job, that if he did not think about the seed at night, the seed would not grow, that his worry was, in some quiet way, holding the whole crop up. You may have believed something similar. You may have believed that your mind rehearsing the situation over and over is what keeps the situation from getting worse. That if you stop thinking about the person you are worried about, something bad will happen to them. That if you stop scanning the field of your life every night, something will fail while you sleep. That your vigilance is what is keeping everything alive. That is a very tiring belief to carry, because it never lets you rest. The farmer came home one evening particularly tired. He had been out in the field since before dawn. His back hurt. His hands were cracked. He sat down on the low bench outside his house. His grandmother was sitting there already, in the last light. She was very old. She had planted seed on that slope herself, 60 years earlier, when she had first come to the village as a young bride. She looked at her grandson. She noticed how tired he was. She said, "Are you sleeping?" He said, "Not really." He said, "I keep thinking about the wheat." She was quiet for a while. She watched the sky. She said, "Do you know what my grandmother used to tell me?" She used to say, "The field does not need you at night. The field has a mother, and the mother is not you." He looked at her. He did not fully understand at first. She said, "When I was young, I used to lie awake and worry about the seed too. I used to think if I stopped worrying, the wheat would forget to grow. And then one year my mother died, and I was too grieved to worry about the field for months. I forgot the field entirely, and do you know what happened?" He shook his head. She said, "The field grew anyway. The wheat came up. The harvest was good. The field had been growing without my worry the whole time. I had only been telling myself I was helping." He sat with that for a long moment. The last light was going out of the sky behind her. A small evening bird called from the olive tree at the edge of the yard. She said, "The seed grows in the ground, and it does not need you to see it. It does not need you to check it. It does not need you to lie in the dark rehearsing whether it survived. It is being tended by something older than you, and something older than me, and something older than this house. All you have to do is plant it in the good soil and let the tending happen." That is what the teacher was pointing at when he told the parable of the man who scatters seed and sleeps. He was pointing at a way of being alive that is possible for a human being, a way of being alive that involves planting and going home and lying down and letting the ground do what the ground does. Notice how the man in the parable does not lose the harvest. He does not fail as a farmer. When the wheat is ripe, he goes out and cuts it. He is not passive. He is not lazy. He is only, on the point of the growing itself, willing to stop pretending it depends on him. The mind, of course, hates this idea. The mind believes it is the reason the seed grew. The mind believes its watching mattered. The mind believes that if it lets go of the vigil, the crop will fail. The mind believes it is holding the field together. You may recognize your own mind in this. You may recognize the way it rehearses the same worry all night, as if the rehearsing were maintenance, as if the worry itself were water in the roots, as if the vigil were what was keeping the person you love alive, or the job you have safe, or the child you are raising well. But the mind is not the reason the field is growing. The mind is only very good at claiming credit for tending it did not actually do. There is a grace in this parable that hurts a little at first, and then relieves a great deal. It is the grace of not being needed by your own life the way you thought you were. The grace of discovering that you are held inside a larger tending. The grace of discovering that the sleep you have been refusing yourself, on the belief that things will fall apart without your vigil, was never actually required for anything to grow. The seed grows while you sleep. The wheat rises while you dream. The tending goes on without you. Notice the peace that comes when you finally believe this. It is not a lazy peace. It is not a peace that says nothing matters. It is a peace that says you were never the one holding it together. That the field has a mother, and the mother is not you, and she has never taken a night off. That is the peace the teacher was offering in that small, forgotten parable. Rest not because there is nothing to do. Rest because the growing does not depend on your rehearsing it in the dark. You may have been the vigil keeper of your own field for a long time. You may have believed that your worry was the thing making it grow. Hear now gently that this was never true. The field has always been growing on its own. You have only been tired. Feel the low bench outside the small house now, in the last light. Feel the old grandmother next to you, quiet and steady. Feel the seed already in the ground, doing what seed does, without your watching. Feel the way the evening is not asking anything of you. Feel the way the field is not asking anything of you. Notice the small evening sounds around you, and notice that none of them are asking for anything either. Feel the way even the mind, when it hears this, begins to loosen its grip on the row nearest the road. You are held tonight by the same tending that holds the field. You do not have to watch it. You do not have to check it. You do not have to lie awake, rehearsing whether it will grow. It will grow. It has been growing. It is growing right now, in the dark, while you rest. Let the field be. Let the wheat rise on its own. Let the ground do its old and quiet work. You are allowed to sleep tonight the way the man in the parable slept, without knowing how, without needing to know, trusting the tending, trusting the field, trusting that you are held inside a grace that has never gone off duty, not for one night, not for 1 hour, not for one heartbeat of the world. There is another story that points to the same trust. There is a story sometimes told about a carpenter in a small town whose workshop stood behind his house at the end of a narrow path lined with lavender. Nobody remembers the town. Nobody remembers the carpenter's name. The story only survives because it is a good one to tell late at night to someone who cannot sleep. The old people used to tell it to their grandchildren when the children lay awake worrying about school, or a sick pet, or a friend who had gone quiet. It is that kind of story, small, slow, not asking anything of you. The carpenter was a good one. He was known in the village for making chairs that did not creak, and doors that closed on the first try, and small carved boxes that women would give as wedding gifts. His hands were slow, careful, kind to the wood. He was the kind of man who would sand a piece of oak twice, even when nobody would ever see the underside, because he believed the wood deserved it. His workshop was small, a wooden bench along one wall, a row of tools hanging from pegs, a single oil lamp on a hook in the middle of the ceiling, which he lit at the beginning of the day and blew out at the end. The lamp was old, made of copper, and had belonged to his father, and his father before him. The carpenter had a wife who loved him. He had 2 children who were mostly grown now. He had enough work to feed the family and a little to save. On the outside of his life, there was nothing to worry about. But the carpenter had a problem, and it may be a problem you know. The carpenter could not close the day. He would come in from the workshop when the light was gone. He would eat supper with his wife. He would sit by the small fire for a while and answer if she asked him something, but his mind would already be drifting back down the path to the workshop. His mind would be picking up tools he had already put down. His mind would be running its hand along the joint of a chair he had finished that afternoon, checking again whether the glue had set. His mind would be counting the small pile of coins in the drawer near the bench and worrying whether the carpenter 2 villages over was making cheaper doors and whether that mattered and what he would do if it did. When he went to bed, the workshop went with him. The lamp in his mind was still burning. He would lie there in the dark next to his wife, and inside his head, every tool was still out on the bench. Every conversation from the day was still being reopened. Every customer's face was still being examined for signs of dissatisfaction. He would rework the small argument he had had that morning with the man who came to pick up the cabinet. He would rehearse the letter he was going to write to the wood supplier about the last batch. He would count the coins again and again. His wife would say to him, "Are you sleeping?" He would say, "Almost." She would say, "Your body has been in bed for 2 hours." He would say, "I know." His mind, meanwhile, was still under the copper lamp, moving from bench to peg to drawer, unable to stop. This went on for years. He aged faster than he should have. His hands stayed steady. His work stayed good. But his eyes grew tired in a way that sleep alone could not fix. His wife began to worry about him. She lit small candles at the church some mornings and did not tell him. One evening, a monk came through the village. There was a small monastery 2 days' walk over the ridge, and every few months one of the brothers would come down to buy supplies, or to see relatives, or simply because the abbot had told him to walk. This monk was older. His face was creased and kind. He was staying the night in the guest room of the parish house, and the carpenter had been asked to fix a chair there that afternoon. The monk was sitting in the small courtyard when the carpenter came in with his tools. They talked for a while about the wood, about the winter, about the crops. And then the monk, without any particular reason, said, "My son, you look like a man whose workshop follows him to bed." The carpenter set down his hammer. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, it does." The monk nodded. He did not seem surprised. He said, "I used to be like that. When I first entered the monastery, I could not close the day either. I would lie on my mat at night, and every unfinished task in the community would be laid out in front of me like tools on a bench. I would rehearse the letters I had not written. I would count the loaves that had not been baked. I would go back through every small conversation and check whether I had said the wrong thing." The carpenter looked up. He said, "How did you stop?" The monk smiled slightly. He said, "I did not stop the way you are hoping. The mind does not stop by being told to stop. The mind stops when you give it a small ritual to hand off the day. That is all it needs. A small ritual, a moment of closing." The carpenter said, "What ritual?" The monk said, "This is what my abbot taught me. Every night, before you leave the workshop, walk over to the lamp, look up at it. Say quietly, in your own words, 'This is not mine to carry until morning.' Then blow it out, and walk out of the workshop, and close the door behind you. And do not open the door again in your mind until the sun is up." The carpenter said, "That is all." The monk said, "That is all. It is not a great teaching. It is a small habit. But the mind is a room, and a room needs a door. If you never close the door, the room fills up. If you close the door, even a badly closed door, the room begins to empty a little. Every night you close it, the closing gets easier. Every night you close it, the room gets quieter." The carpenter thought about this for a long time. He finished the chair. He said goodbye to the monk. He walked home slowly along the path lined with lavender, and the sun was going down behind the ridge, and the smell of supper was already coming from the small houses along the way. That night, before he left the workshop, he did what the monk had said. He walked over to the copper lamp. He stood beneath it for a moment. He said quietly, "This day is not mine to carry into the night." He blew the lamp out. He walked out of the workshop. He closed the door behind him. He did not look back. When he lay down in bed that night, he noticed something small. The workshop had not fully followed him. The tools were still on the bench in his mind, but they were behind a door now. The door was not sealed. It was not perfect, but the door was there, and the mind, for the first time in years, felt as if it had been given permission to leave the room. He slept a little that night, not deeply, but a little. He did the ritual again the next night, and the next, and the next. Some nights the door held, some nights it did not, and the workshop came back with him, and he lay in the dark counting coins again. But most nights, slowly, over months, the door began to hold longer. The lamp began to feel truly out. The room began to feel truly closed. He grew older, and he grew steadier, and his eyes grew less tired. He began to sleep, almost through the night. He would still wake sometimes, near dawn, with a tool in his mind, and he would notice it, and he would say quietly to himself, "This is not mine to carry yet," and he would go back to sleep. The workshop became something he could visit in the morning again, not something that lived under his pillow. His grandchildren would come to sit in the workshop with him on weekends. He would let them hold the small wooden boxes he was carving. He would let them help him sand the underside of a chair, even though nobody would ever see it, because the wood deserved it. And when the light was going, and it was time to close up, he would take one of the small children over to the copper lamp. He would lift the child up. He would let the child blow it out. He would say, "This day is not ours to carry into the night." The child would giggle, and he would smile, and he would close the door behind them. That is how the ritual passed on, not as a serious lesson, as a small game before supper, as something an old carpenter did with his grandchildren in the last light of a Saturday, that they would remember for the rest of their lives. When his grandchildren came to visit, they would find him sitting by the fire in the evening, actually there, not half back in the workshop. His wife noticed. She did not say anything, but she stopped lighting the small candles at the church. Notice what the ritual actually did. It did not solve the workshop. It did not finish the tasks. It did not lower his worry about the carpenter 2 villages over. It only gave the mind a place to hand the day off. A small, deliberate gesture that meant, "This is not mine to carry now." Notice that the closing did not require any change to the workshop itself. The workshop was exactly as it had been. Only the man's grip on it had softened. The mind is often willing to let go if you give it a way to let go. What it will not do is let go for no reason at all. It needs a gesture, a moment, a closing, a door. You may find this useful tonight. You may have your own workshop that keeps following you into bed. Not a real workshop, the workshop of your job, the workshop of your family situation, the workshop of the conversation you had at 3 in the afternoon that will not stop replaying. The lamp is still burning in there. The tools are still out. The mind cannot leave the room. You do not have to solve any of it tonight. You only have to blow the lamp out. You can do it in your own words. You can say it quietly to yourself, right now. This is not mine to carry until the morning. You can picture the lamp. You can picture the small breath that puts it out. You can picture the door of the room closing behind you. That is grace given to you as a gesture. A small, deliberate act of grace that lets the mind hand off what it has been holding. You are not abandoning anything. You are only trusting that the workshop will still be there in the morning. It always is. The tools do not walk away. The coins do not disappear. Nothing depends on your continuing to worry about it in the dark. There is a grace tending it while you rest, the same tending that dresses the field and feeds the bird. Notice how the same tending has come back around, the way the old stories keep returning to the same quiet truth. Feel the small breath now in your imagination. Feel it going toward the lamp. Feel the light going soft and then out. Feel the small darkness of the workshop settling. Feel the door closing. Feel yourself walking away, slowly, along a path lined with lavender, and the smell of supper coming from the houses along the way. You are held tonight in a peace that does not depend on your finishing anything. You are held by a grace that does not require the door to be perfectly closed. Even a badly closed door will do. Even a door you have to close again tomorrow will do. The mind learns, the room empties, the rest comes. Rest now. The workshop is not yours until the sun is up. Settle inside the closing. Sink inside the tending that has never asked you to stay awake. There is another story that points to the same closing. There is a story the teacher used to tell about a shepherd who had 100 sheep. It is one of the smaller stories in the Gospels, a quiet one. It does not have a miracle in it. It only has a hillside and 100 sheep, and one that had wandered off. The teacher would tell it this way. He would say, imagine you are a shepherd, and you have 100 sheep, and at the end of the day you count them, and there are only 99. What do? You leave the 99 where they are safe, and you go out into the hills, and you look for the one that is missing. And when you find it, you carry it home on your shoulders, and you are more glad in that moment about the one you found than about all the ones that never wandered. That is the whole story. A shepherd, a missing sheep, a shoulder, home. You may have heard this story told as a lesson about being lost and needing to come back. That is not exactly wrong. But the fishermen who first heard the teacher say it did not hear it that way. They heard it as a story about the shepherd, about what kind of shepherd he was, about what a shepherd will do when the count comes up short. There is a small detail in the story that is easy to miss. The sheep is never asked to find its way back. The sheep is not told to be a better sheep. The sheep is not told to try harder next time. The sheep does not have to remember the way home. The shepherd comes for it. The shepherd carries it home. All the sheep has to do is stop trembling long enough to be picked up. That is a strange thing to say to a mind that is used to fixing itself, and it may be the exact thing your mind needs to hear tonight. There is a story sometimes told about a shepherd who lived in a small stone hut on the side of a hill, in a country of stones and dry olive trees. He kept his sheep in a low pen built of loose rocks near the hut. His days were slow. He walked with the sheep in the morning, up the slope to the grass at the top of the ridge. He walked with them in the afternoon back down. He counted them at the door of the pen as they came in, one by one, with his hand on their backs. His name is not remembered, only the story. One evening, in the last at light, he counted the sheep as they came in. He counted to 99, and then he waited. The last sheep did not come. He counted again, running his hand along the backs of the ones already in the pen, in case he had missed one. 99. He looked out at the slope. The sun was almost down. The wind had turned cold. Somewhere on the hillside, one small animal was alone in the dark. He did not sigh. He did not curse. He did not stand there thinking about how tired he was. though he was tired. He simply took his stick and his lamp, and he closed the pen behind him, and he walked back up the slope. The other sheep watched him go. They did not understand. From their point of view, they were safely in the pen. They had made it home. The count was almost right. 99 was very close to 100. 99 was, by any reasonable measure, enough. But the shepherd did not think in the language of enough. He thought in the language of who was missing. And the one that was missing had a face he knew. He knew where she liked to eat. He knew the sound she made when she was thirsty. He knew the small mark on her ear from when she was born. He was not going back for 99 plus 1. In his head, he was going back for her. He walked up the slope in the dark. The lamp swung slowly in his hand. The wind was picking up. He climbed for a long time, higher than the usual grazing ridge, higher than the sheep normally went. He walked past small caves in the rock. He listened. Sheep, when they are lost, do not make a lot of noise. They do not know what to do. They freeze sometimes. They stand in one place and shiver. They do not call out the way a dog would, or run home the way a horse might. They just stand still in the dark and wait to be found or eaten. You may recognize this shape. You may have felt this way in your own life more than once. Not because you did something dramatic, because you drifted quietly, one step at a time, from where you meant to be, and now you are somewhere in the dark that you do not fully recognize, and you do not know how to walk yourself home. So you have been standing very still, waiting, not calling out, because you do not really know what you would call. There is something in the mind at night that feels like this, especially at the hours when other people are asleep. A quiet sense of having wandered too far, of having missed the count, of not knowing whether the way back is even open anymore. That sense is not a punishment. It is only the mind noticing that it is far from something. It is often the beginning, without knowing it, of being found. The shepherd walked for a long time. Finally, above the last outcrop of rocks, near a small cluster of thorn bushes, his lamp caught a shape, a small white shape, standing still, trembling, its wool wet from the wind, its eyes wide. He knelt down beside her. He did not scold her. He did not lecture her on how far she had come from the pen. He did not tell her she should have known better. He did not make her feel small. He simply put his hand on her side. He said her name, quietly, in the dark. He picked her up. He put her across his shoulders, the way shepherds have carried sheep for as long as there have been shepherds. Her forelegs hung down against his chest. Her head rested near his ear. He turned around. He began the long walk back down the slope. She did not walk home. She did not have to. He carried her. You may notice something in your body when you hear this part of the story. A small softening, a small letting go, because there is something in every person that has been trying for a long time to walk itself home. And there is a grace in this parable that says, you do not have to. You do not have to figure out the way. You do not have to prove that you have learned your lesson. You are already being carried. Notice what the shepherd did not require. He did not require the sheep to understand why she had wandered. He did not require her to promise she would not wander again. He did not require her to be grateful, or to explain herself, or to walk beside him. He required nothing from her. He only came and lifted her and turned toward home. The sheep on his shoulders could rest. That is a very small word. Rest, but it is the whole of what the shepherd made possible. The sheep did not have to keep herself alive on the mountain any longer. She could stop being afraid. She could stop trembling. She could feel the warm weight of his shoulders under her body and know that whatever came next, she was not the one doing the walking. That is the peace this story hands you. Not the peace of never having wandered, but the peace of being carried when you have. You may have been trying, in some quiet way, to walk yourself home, to fix the thing you drifted from, to remember the way back to who you used to be. That kind of effort is exhausting. It is also, according to this parable, unnecessary. The shepherd does not need you to know the way back. The shepherd knows the way. The shepherd has known the way the whole time. The teacher told this story to fishermen and tax collectors and women who had been told they were beyond finding. He told it in villages and on hillsides and at supper tables. He told it over and over because he knew how tired people got trying to find their own way back. He knew that most people at some point in their lives feel like the sheep on the hillside, frozen, not calling out, not sure the shepherd is still looking. He told it to say, quietly, the shepherd is looking. The shepherd is already walking up the slope with a lamp. The shepherd knows your name. You do not have to make it back tonight. You do not have to solve anything before the sun comes up. You are already being come for. You have always been come for. Feel the shoulders now in your imagination. Feel yourself set gently across them. Feel the warm weight of them under your body. Feel your legs stop trying. Feel the small motion of the walk, slow and steady, down a slope you do not have to know. Feel the lamp swinging beside you. Feel the dark thinning as you go down. Feel the pen at the bottom of the hill where the other 99 are already sleeping. Feel the door opening. Feel the warm smell of home. You are held tonight by someone whose job is to come after the missing. You are held by a grace that does not require you to have found your own way. You are being carried. You can stop walking. You can stop calling out. You can rest inside the fact that you have already been found. Notice the small relief of that. Notice that you did not have to earn the finding. That is grace. Grace is what walks up the slope with a lamp when you have gone still. Grace is what puts you on the shoulders. Grace is what carries you home. Lie down in the shepherd's arms. Settle across the shepherd's shoulders. Rest inside the peace of not having to walk yourself the rest of the way. Consider what happened when the shepherd finally reached the bottom of the hill with the sheep on his shoulders. He did not run. He did not announce anything. He simply walked her to the pen where the other 99 were already sleeping. He unlatched the low wooden gate. He set her down inside, gently, next to the warmth of the flock. She stood still for a moment, still unsure. Her legs were shaky. Her wool was cold. She did not fully understand what had just happened. But the other sheep did what sheep do. They moved slowly around her. They pressed in beside her. They shared their warmth without being asked. And after a while she folded her legs beneath her and lay down and put her head against the soft side of another sheep, and she slept. The shepherd stood outside the pen for a while, watching. He was tired too. His back ached from carrying her down. His legs were sore. But he was not thinking about that. He was watching her sleep. He was making sure her breathing had gone slow and even. He was making sure her wool had stopped trembling. Only when he was sure that she was truly settled did he close the gate and blow out the lamp and walk quietly back to his own small hut. That is a picture worth carrying tonight. The shepherd standing at the gate, watching until the sheep is truly asleep. The shepherd not going to bed himself until the sheep is safe. The shepherd not needing thanks, not needing recognition, not needing anything from the sheep except her rest. You may be that sheep tonight. You may not fully understand where you are. Your legs may still be shaky. Your wool may still be cold. But there is warmth around you that is not yours. There is company around you that you did not have to arrange. and there is someone standing outside the pen who will not go to his own hut until he is sure you are asleep. You are safe, you are inside the pen, you are next to the flock, and the one who came to find you is watching from the gate. There is another story that points to the same finding. There is a much older story tucked into the same scriptures, older than the fishermen, older than the villages of Galilee. This one comes from the time of the prophets, from the mountains east of the great inland sea, from a man named Elijah who had walked too far and slept too little. Elijah is a name you may have heard in passing. He was a prophet in a hard time. His life had been full of large events. He had stood in front of kings. He had spoken words he had not chosen. He had done what he believed he was supposed to do. And by the time this story begins, he was very tired. He had traveled for days across dry country. He had barely eaten. He had walked through wind and sun until his sandals were falling apart. When he finally could not walk any further, he sat down under a small tree in the middle of nowhere. He lay back against the trunk. He closed his eyes. He did not think he could go on. You may know this kind of tiredness too, not from a desert, from your own life, from the accumulation of years of doing what you thought you were supposed to do, from carrying things that were not quite yours to carry, from the long walk of being a decent person in a world that does not always notice. There is a tiredness that comes at the end of that walk, a tiredness that is not fixed by one good night of sleep. Elijah was in that kind of tiredness. He fell asleep under the tree. He slept without meaning to. The wind moved in the branches over him. The desert grew cool. The stars came out. At some point in the small hours, he was gently woken by a touch on his shoulder. He opened his eyes. There was someone beside him, a messenger. The story says it was an angel, but you can also picture it more simply. Someone quiet, someone who did not lecture, someone who had put a small loaf of warm bread and a jug of water on the ground beside him, and who said only, "Get up and eat." Elijah ate, he drank, he lay back down, he fell asleep again. Notice that the messenger did not tell him to keep going, did not tell him to be stronger, did not tell him he was disappointing anyone. The messenger only fed him and let him sleep again. That was the whole ministry. Later, in the same night or the next, the messenger woke him a second time. Again the small bread, again the water, again only the words, "Get up and eat, because the road ahead of you is long." Elijah ate again, he drank again, he got up, and on the strength of those two small meals, the story says he walked 40 days and 40 nights, all the way to a mountain called Horeb, the mountain of the old encounters, the mountain where his people believed the presence of God had once been known. You do not need to picture 40 days literally. That number, in this old language, means only a long time, long enough for something to change inside a person, long enough for the mind which had been so loud and so tired under the tree to grow quieter as the miles went on. When he reached the mountain, he found a small cave in its side. He crawled inside. He lay down in the shelter of the rock. He was still tired, but a different kind of tired. He had walked so long that the noise of his own life had become distant. He was ready, in a way he had not been under the tree, to hear something. He heard in the cave a voice, not a loud voice, a voice that asked him a simple question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He tried to answer. He said what he had rehearsed on the long walk. He said everything he had done, and how alone he felt, and how far he had come. The voice listened. Then it said, "Come out of the cave, stand on the mountain, and you will see." Elijah stood at the mouth of the cave, and something began to happen. A great wind came up. A wind so strong it moved rocks on the mountainside. A wind that would have knocked a man over if he had been standing in the open. Elijah watched from the cave, but the voice did not come in the wind. The wind passed. Then the mountain shook. A tremor rolled through the rock beneath him. Loose stones bounced down the slope. The whole mountainside felt like it was breathing, but the voice did not come in the earthquake. The tremor passed. Then a fire moved across the mountain, bright, hot, sudden, the kind of fire that catches everything and burns for a while and then stops. Elijah watched it, but the voice did not come in the fire. The fire passed. And then, when everything loud had gone, when the wind and the ground and the flame had all left the mountain, there was a small silence, and in the silence, a whisper, a voice so quiet you could almost mistake it for your own breath, a voice that seemed to come from inside the quiet itself. Elijah pulled his cloak over his face. He knew the voice at once. He went out to stand at the mouth of the cave. He waited to hear what it would say. That is the scene the story wants you to notice. Not the wind, not the earthquake, not the fire, the whisper. The mind that cannot sleep is often looking in the wrong places. It is scanning the wind. It is checking the ground for tremors. It is waiting to see whether a fire has started somewhere on the ridge. It is convinced that whatever it is seeking, whether peace or an answer or a sense that everything is going to be all right, will arrive in something dramatic, something loud enough to be sure of, something big enough to end the searching. But this story says the opposite. This story says the voice you are waiting for does not come in the loud. It comes in the quiet that arrives after the loud has passed. It comes in the silence you have been avoiding because you thought silence meant absence. It comes in the small, still voice that speaks under the noise. That is a strange thing to hear at first, because most of us have been taught that silence is bad. That silence is where our worst thoughts get loud. That silence is what we fill with music, or a screen, or a to-do list, so we do not have to hear the whisper of anything. But Elijah, on the mountain, learned something the loud world had not been able to teach him. He learned that the whisper was there the whole time. The whisper was not competing with the wind. The whisper was not shouting to be heard over the earthquake. The whisper was simply waiting for the noise to pass, and the noise always eventually passes. And when it does, the whisper is still there. Your mind tonight may have been full of wind, full of the small tremors of the day, full of small fires. That is all right. The wind is doing what wind does. The tremors are doing what tremors do. You do not have to argue with any of them. You do not have to make them stop. You only have to wait quietly in the shelter of your cave until they pass, and notice when they have passed that the whisper is still there. Notice how much of your night has been spent bracing against the wind. Notice how much energy you have spent waiting for the ground to be steady before you were willing to be still. Notice that Elijah did not wait for the storm to be over before he went to the mountain. He walked into it. He rested in it. He let the wind come and pass without trying to arrange it. That is a form of grace this old story gives you. The grace of learning that the quiet is not empty. The grace of learning that the whisper does not need you to hush the world first. It only needs you to stop trying to make yourself heard over it. There is a peace that lives inside a silence like this. It is not the peace of a life without wind. It is not the peace of a mind that has been fixed. It is the peace of someone who has learned that the whisper is always there, under everything, and that the whisper is enough. The whisper is what holds up the wind and the ground and the fire. The whisper is what was there before any of it. The whisper is what will be there when all of it has passed. You are held tonight by the whisper, not by the drama, not by the answer, not by whether tomorrow goes the way you want it to go. You are held by the small, still voice that has never left the mountain, and that has never left you either. Rest in the cave now. Let the wind do what the wind does. Let the tremors pass. Let the small fires burn themselves out on the slope below. None of it is the voice. None of it is what you are here for. Wait quietly. The whisper is coming. The whisper is already here. You do not have to strain to hear it. You do not have to be worthy of it. You do not have to have done the right things this year to receive it. It is only a whisper. It is only a small, still voice. It is only the quiet that arrives when the loud has passed. And it is speaking to you now, gently, the way it spoke to Elijah at the mouth of the cave, softly, without demand, with a grace that has been waiting for you a long time. Settle in the whisper. Lean into the still small voice. Rest in the peace that lives underneath the wind. Stay in the way this old story keeps returning to the same quiet truth. The loud passes, the whisper stays. The whisper has always stayed. You are held here. You have always been held here, and you are allowed to sleep inside the sound of it, without needing to make out the words. There is another story that points to the same quiet. There is a story sometimes told about a young man who went to visit his grandmother in the country because he could not sleep. Nobody remembers the young man's name. Nobody remembers the name of the village. It is one of those stories that lives in kitchens and gets passed down between people who love someone that cannot sleep. It is a very small story. It happens in one afternoon. Nothing dramatic occurs, and it has been quietly comforting people for a long time. The young man lived in a city. He had a good job and a small apartment and a life that looked, from the outside, exactly like it was supposed to look. His mother had been proud of him. His friends thought he was doing well. On paper, he had no reason to complain. But he had not slept properly in months. Every night he would lie down. Every night his mind would begin its work. It would begin turning over the small choices of the day. It would begin rehearsing conversations. It would begin worrying about the year to come, and the friends he had drifted from, and the future of his job, and the strange small aches in his body that might mean something or might not. His mind moved in circles. Every time he tried to hold still, the circles moved faster. He had tried many things over the last months. He had tried lying still and counting his breath. He had tried listing what he was grateful for. He had tried telling himself to stop and arguing with the thoughts and defeating them and explaining them away. Nothing worked. The more he engaged with the mind, the louder the circles became. Finally, he did what tired people sometimes do. He went home. He took a train out of the city on a Friday afternoon. He walked from the small station up the road to the village. He knocked on the door of his grandmother's house at the end of a lane lined with old fig trees. She opened the door. She looked at him. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Come in. You look like a man who has not slept in a while." He came in. The house smelled the way it had always smelled, bread and dried herbs, and the small wood stove in the corner. She sat him down at the kitchen table. She poured him a small cup of water. She sat across from him. He told her what was happening. He told her about the circles at night, about the mind that would not settle, about all the things he had tried to make it stop. He told her he was very tired and that he did not know what to do. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he was finished, she was quiet for a long time. She looked down at her own cup of water on the table. Then she stood up. She went to the counter and she picked up a clear glass jar. She came back to the table. she said. Watch. She poured water from a pitcher into the jar until it was almost full. Then she reached over to a small pot on the windowsill where she kept a little garden herb, and she took a pinch of dry soil from the top of the pot. She dropped the soil into the jar. Then she picked up a small wooden spoon and stirred it hard, round and round in tight, fast circles. The water became cloudy at once. It filled with dark, swirling particles until it was almost brown and you could not see through it. She set the spoon down. She said, "This is your mind at night." He looked at the jar. He said, "Yes." She smiled a little. She said, "Watch what happens." She sat down. She did nothing. She only put her hands in her lap. He watched the jar, too. For a long moment, nothing seemed to change. The water was still cloudy. The particles were still moving. His grandmother did not say anything. Then, very slowly, something began to shift. The water in the middle began to look a little less dark than the water at the top. A small piece of soil settled to the bottom, then another. The swirling grew gentler. The particles that had been suspended in the water began, one by one, to sink. The water above them grew slightly clearer. She still did not say anything. He watched. After a while, the water in the top half of the jar was clear again. The soil sat quietly at the bottom, in a small dark layer, as if it had always meant to be there. The water was still. You could see through it. You could almost forget the soil was in the jar at all. His grandmother finally spoke. She said, "Notice what I did to make it clear." He said nothing. "You did nothing." She said, "That is right. I did nothing. I only stopped stirring." She let that sit in the room for a while. The last light was coming in through the small window over the sink. A fly was somewhere near the ceiling. The wood stove was making its small settling noises. Then she said, "The mind is like this jar. The soil in the water is not the problem. The soil is only what the day put in. The problem is that we keep stirring. We stir with our worry. We stir with our arguing. We stir by trying to figure it out. The stirring is what keeps the water dark. It is not the soil. It is the stirring." He thought about this. He said, "But what do I do at night when the mind starts turning like that?" She said, "You do not stir. That is all. You do not push the water. You do not scoop out the soil. You do not shake the jar to make the particles go faster. You only stop stirring and you wait, and the water clears on its own, in its own time." He said, "And if the mind will not stop stirring?" She said, "Then you notice that the mind is stirring, and you set the spoon down again. Every time you notice, you set the spoon down. That is the whole practice. That is the whole thing." He sat with that for a long time. He looked at the jar. The water was still clear. The soil at the bottom was still quiet. Nothing about the situation was different. There was still soil in the jar, but the water was drinkable now. The soil had settled. The clarity had come, not by removing anything, but by stopping. He stayed with his grandmother for the weekend. That first night, in the small guest room at the back of the house, he lay down in the dark. The mind began, as it always did, to stir. He noticed. He said quietly to himself, "Set the spoon down." He waited. The mind stirred again. He noticed. He said again, "Set the spoon down." He did not sleep well the first night, but he slept a little, and the sleeping came, not because he had solved anything, but because for the first time in months, he had stopped fighting the water. You may find this useful tonight, because the mind that will not sleep is often a mind that is stirring, without knowing that stirring is what it is doing. Stirring is not thinking. Stirring is not solving. Stirring is only movement without settling, the same motion happening again and again. The mind believes that if it keeps moving fast enough, it will eventually reach clarity on its own. The mind is wrong about this, though it is not the mind's fault. Clarity does not come from moving faster. Clarity comes from stopping. Clarity comes from letting the water be held still by its own weight. You do not have to force the soil to the bottom. The soil knows how to fall. Gravity is doing it whether you help or not. There is a grace in the world that pulls the small dark particles down and lets the water clear on its own without asking anything of you. That grace has been at work for as long as there has been water. It is at work in you right now, in this room, in this jar. All you have to do is stop stirring. All you have to do is let yourself be held by the same gravity that holds the jar. Notice, if you can, the small ways your mind is currently stirring, the way it is rehearsing tomorrow, the way it is arguing with a memory, the way it is scanning the day for something you might have missed. That is all stirring. That is the spoon. You do not have to defeat it. You do not have to make the mind stop wanting to stir. You only have to set the spoon down. Every time you notice you are stirring, that is not a failure. That is the practice. Noticing the stirring is the first half of setting the spoon down. Every set down is a small grace. Every set down is a small permission for the water to clear. Every set down is a small trust that the soil knows how to fall on its own. The piece of a clearing jar is not the piece of an empty jar. There is still soil in the water. There is still a day in the mind. Nothing has been removed, but the water is drinkable now. The mind is quiet enough to sleep in. You are held tonight by the same grace that pulls the soil down. You are held by the same stillness that clears the jar. You are held by a gravity older than your worry, older than your day, older than your stirring. You do not have to remove anything. You do not have to solve anything. You only have to stop stirring and let yourself be held. Feel your hands loosen now. Feel the small spoon in them go quiet. Feel yourself set it down on the table. Feel the water beginning slowly to clear. Feel the soil beginning slowly to settle. Feel the small kitchen at your grandmother's house, quiet and warm, with the last light coming through the window. Feel her hands folded in her lap. Feel yours doing the same. Feel the way the whole room seems to be holding its own soil still, along with you. Settle inside the clearing. Sink inside the settling. Rest inside the peace that arrives, not by force, but by stopping. Sit inside the small kitchen where the jar is on the table and the water is clearing, and the grace of gravity is doing the work you have been trying to do yourself. There is another story that points to the same stillness. There is a story near the end of the Gospels that is about two people walking home at the end of a very hard day. They were walking on a dirt road out of the city. The sun was going down over the hills behind them. They had lost someone, and their minds on the road could not stop turning. You may have walked home like this once, or many times, over the course of your life. Not necessarily out of a city, sometimes out of a hospital, or a funeral, or an office where a hard conversation just ended, sometimes just out of your own bedroom at the end of a bad day. The road under your feet is not the same road that took you out that morning. Your body walks. But your mind is somewhere behind you, in the room where the news came. The mind keeps going back. It keeps rehearsing. It cannot let the day be over. The two people in this story were named. One was called Cleopas. The other is left without a name in the old text. Some people think it was his wife. Some people think it was a friend. It does not matter for the story. What matters is that there were two of them, and they were walking, and their conversation was tired and looping, the way conversations get when the mind cannot stop. They were walking to a village called Emmaus. It was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. That is a long walk, long enough for the sun to travel a good distance across the sky, long enough for your legs to grow heavy, long enough for the mind to run the same worry 300 or 400 times without solving anything, without letting it go, without arriving anywhere new. You may know this walk. This is the walk you take at 3 in the morning when you cannot sleep. This is the walk you take in your own bed. This is the walk of the mind that keeps going over the day. The events did not change. The conversation did not change. But you keep walking through them on the small inner road between Jerusalem and Emmaus, hoping that this time the walking will bring you somewhere different. It rarely does. But the walking is what the mind knows how to do, and so it walks. While they were walking, a third person joined them. The story says he came up alongside them. He did not startle them. He simply began walking with them in the way travelers on a shared road sometimes fall in together, without announcing anything. He was a stranger to them, or so they thought. Their eyes, the old text says, were kept from recognizing him. That is a small detail, but it is the whole story. Their eyes were kept from recognizing him. He asked them what they were talking about. They stopped in the road. They looked at him with sad faces. They asked him if he was the only one who had not heard what had happened. And then they told him the whole thing. They told him what they had lost. They told him what they had hoped for. They told him how the day had gone. They told him the same story they had been telling each other on the road, only this time to a fresh set of ears. So it came out a little differently, a little more slowly, a little more honestly. He listened. He did not interrupt them. When they were finished, he began to speak. He walked with them, and he talked to them about the old stories, about the prophets, about the meaning of what had happened. He spoke gently and steadily and without demand, and as he spoke, something inside them began, without their noticing, to loosen. The looping in the mind slowed a little. The road beneath their feet began to feel like a road again, and not just a stage for the same rehearsal of the same day. They did not know who he was. Their eyes were kept from recognizing him, but their bodies began to walk a little differently. When they reached the village of Emmaus, the sun was going down. The road was turning gold at the edges. He acted as if he were going to continue past their door. He was going farther. But they said to him, "Stay with us, because it is toward evening, and the day is almost over." That is the sentence to remember. It is one of the smallest sentences in this whole story, and it is one of the tenderest sentences in the whole Gospels. Stay with us, because it is toward evening, and the day is almost over. They did not know who they were inviting in. They only knew they had been comforted by his company. They only knew they did not want the walk to end without him. They only knew that the day was almost over, and they wanted him at the table. He came in. He sat down with them at the small table. There was bread on the table. He took the bread in his hands. He blessed it. He broke it. He gave it to them. And in that moment, their eyes were opened. They recognized him. They saw who had been walking with them the whole afternoon. And then he was gone. The seat across from them was empty. The bread was still on the table, broken, but the guest had vanished. They sat there for a long moment. They looked at each other. They said to each other, "Was our heart not burning within us on the road while he was speaking with us?" They had felt it the whole time. Something inside them had been warming as they walked. Something inside them had known, before their eyes did, that they were not alone. That is the scene the story wants you to notice tonight. The two of them, on the road, walking with the same worry looping in their heads, not able to stop, not able to see clearly, not able to solve anything. And beside them, unrecognized, the whole afternoon, someone walking with them, someone listening, someone slowly loosening the grip of the story they kept retelling. Their eyes were kept from recognizing him, but he was there. He had been there for hours before they even noticed his footsteps. You may be walking a road like this tonight, not to a village, to your bed, to the far side of a hard week, to whatever tomorrow is going to ask of you. Your mind may be looping, your feet may be tired, you may not feel any presence with you at all. But the point of this story is not that Cleopas was clever enough to recognize the stranger. He was not. Neither was his companion. They walked most of the way home in ignorance. They only recognized their walking companion at the very end, when the bread was broken, and by then he had already been with them for miles. The point of this story is that he was there the whole time, whether they knew it or not, whether they recognized him or not, whether they felt him or not. He had joined them on the road as soon as they had begun to walk it, and he had walked all 7 miles with them. You are walking with someone tonight. You may not feel it. You may not recognize it. Your mind may be too loud with the day to notice a quiet presence beside you. That is all right. This story is not about being spiritually advanced enough to see. It is about being walked with anyway. Notice how gently the stranger came alongside them. He did not knock on their heads. He did not announce himself. He did not require them to recognize him first. He simply began walking. He simply asked what they were talking about. He simply let them tell him the whole tired story from the beginning. And he stayed. That is the shape of the grace this story hands you. It is not the grace of being rescued from the road. It is the grace of being walked with on the road. It is the grace of someone falling in beside you without announcement and staying until the day is done. Notice too what invited him in at the end. They did not pass a test. They did not answer a question correctly. They only said, "Stay with us," because it is toward evening and the day is almost over. You are allowed to say the same thing tonight, not out loud, not even as a prayer, simply as a small opening inside your chest. Stay with me, because it is toward evening and the day is almost over. That is enough. That is all the story asks of you. The rest was already true. The peace of this story is not the peace of understanding everything. Cleopas did not understand anything for most of the afternoon. His eyes were kept from recognizing his own guest, and yet he was walked with, and yet he was accompanied, and yet the day ended with bread being broken at his own table. You are held tonight in the same way. You are held by a company that does not require your recognition to remain beside you. You do not have to see clearly. You do not have to feel the presence. You do not have to recognize who is walking beside you. You only have to walk, one foot after the other, at whatever tired pace your day has left in you, and to let the day come toward its evening, and to let yourself be joined without needing to earn it. Feel the road under you now. Feel the gold light on the hills behind you. Feel the small dust rising with your feet. Feel the tired conversation slowing in your head without your having to force it slower. Feel someone falling in beside you without announcement, matching your pace. Feel the way the mind loosens a little when it is not walking alone. Feel the small peace that begins when the loneliness of the road quietly ends. Settle into the walking. Stay in the company. Rest in the grace of being joined on a road you did not know was shared. Sink into the peace of not being the only one going home tonight. The day is almost over. Stay in the walking. You are not alone in it. You have not been alone for a long time, though the mind may have told you otherwise. There is another story that points to the same company. There is a song that has been sung in one language or another for about 3,000 years, longer than most countries have existed, longer than most of what we call history. It is a small song, only 6 verses long, and it is about a shepherd and a valley and a table and still water. It has been sung at bedsides and in fields and at the end of long days by people who did not know what else to say to themselves. You may know it already. Many people know it without knowing they know it. Its first line has entered so many other stories, so many other songs, so many other quiet moments. The Lord is my shepherd. That is the beginning. And then, in the second line, it says something that this whole night has been circling toward, without your knowing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. That is the line. That is the small green pasture at the middle of this old song, and it is the place we want to walk into now, gently at the end of the night, before we finally lie down for good. The song is called the 23rd Psalm. Nobody knows exactly who wrote it. Tradition says it was written by a man named David, who had spent his own younger years watching sheep on the hills outside a small village. He knew what shepherds did. He knew what sheep needed. And when he grew older and had walked through his own valleys and had known his own fears in the dark, he wrote this song out of a shepherd's imagination. It is a song about being led. That is what it is really about. Not about being tested, not about being taught, being led. You may not have thought of yourself tonight as a sheep being led. That word may not sound flattering to you, but hear it in its old sense. A sheep is only an animal that cannot see very far ahead, and that gets easily frightened, and that does not always know where the good grass is, and that sometimes stops in the road, exhausted, and needs someone to come and touch its back and say, "This way." That is not a demeaning picture. That is an honest one. Most of us are sheep, most of the time. Most of us cannot see very far ahead. Most of us get frightened. Most of us do not know where the good grass is. David, in the psalm, is telling you that there is a shepherd who does know. He wrote, "He makes me lie down in green pastures." Notice the strange verb. He does not say the shepherd suggests it. He does not say the shepherd hopes I will lie down. He says the shepherd makes me lie down, because sheep, when they are anxious, do not lie down on their own. Sheep only lie down when they feel safe. Sheep only lie down when the pasture is good, and no predator is near, and the flock is close, and they have eaten enough. A shepherd who is doing his job well knows this. He arranges the pasture so that lying down becomes possible. That is a strange tenderness in the verb. He makes me lie down, not by force, by arrangement, by taking care of the 4 or 5 things that were keeping the sheep on its feet, by showing the sheep with his own body that it is safe to fold its legs and let the grass hold it. You may have been unable to lie down tonight in the same way, not because you did not want to, because something in your mind has not yet been arranged. Some small watchfulness has not yet been set aside. Some corner of the day has not yet been shown to be safe. That is not a failure of yours. It is only sheep behavior. The shepherd will arrange it. The shepherd knows this. The next line of the song is what the miniature of this whole night has been pointing to. He leads me beside still waters. Not fast waters, not rushing waters, not waters churned by wind or foaming over rocks. Still waters. Water that has come to rest in a small pool. Water that reflects the sky back at itself without breaking it. Water that a sheep can drink from without fear of being carried away. Water that is quiet. There is a small reason for this in the shepherd's practice. Sheep are afraid of moving water. A sheep will not drink from a fast stream. It is too worried. It cannot see the bottom. It does not know if it will fall in. A good shepherd, if the only water available is fast, will dig a small pool beside the stream and let the water settle into it. He will make the water still so that the sheep can drink. That is the picture. A shepherd with his hands making the water still. You may have been drinking from fast water for a long time. Most of the day in the world we now live in is fast water, fast information, fast decisions, fast feelings that come and go before you can name them. The mind is a sheep in front of a rushing stream. It is thirsty, but it cannot drink. It stands there, watching the water go by, unable to lower its head. Still water is what the mind needs. Still water is what it has been asked to find. Still water is not the absence of water. It is water that has been allowed to settle. It is water that has been arranged by someone patient for the drinking. That is the grace of this psalm. It says, quietly, someone has already dug you the pool. Someone has already made the water still. All you have to do is lower your head. Then the song says, He restores my soul. That word, restore, means brings back, returns. It is what you do to a piece of furniture that has been broken. It is what you do to a friendship that has drifted. It is what you do to a person who has been away for a long time. You restore them. You bring them back to themselves. The shepherd in the psalm is not fixing the sheep. He is not upgrading the sheep. He is not making the sheep into a better sheep. He is bringing the sheep back to itself. That is what the still water does. That is what the green pasture does. That is what the lying down does. It brings you back to a self that has been away from itself for a while. You may have been away from yourself for a while. You may not have realized how far. The pace of the day, the pace of the year, the pace of the mind at night, all of it can carry you a long way from the person you actually are underneath. This psalm is a song about coming back, not by effort, by being led, by being made to lie down, by being brought beside quiet water and given permission to drink. That is the grace of the whole song, and it does not require you to be anyone new before you receive it. Notice that the sheep does not have to do any of this. The sheep does not choose the pasture. The sheep does not dig the pool. The sheep does not restore its own soul. All of it is happening around the sheep by the shepherd without being asked. That is a grace that has been running underneath your life for longer than you know. It has been arranging things while you were doing other work. It has been preparing pastures you have not yet walked into. That is peace of a kind you cannot arrange for yourself. That is peace that is arranged for you. That is peace that is set out in front of you, in the shape of grass and water and quiet, while you were still walking in the wrong direction, still standing in front of the fast stream, still exhausted from your own vigil. The pasture was already prepared. The pool was already dug. The stillness was already there. You are only now noticing it. Be still then. Be still in the way the water in the small pool is still, not empty of anything, not less than a stream, only settled, only reflective, only quiet. You are held tonight by the same shepherd that David sang about 3,000 years ago. You are held by a shepherd who has been arranging pastures for a long time. He has been digging still pools for a long time. He has been restoring the souls of tired people for a long time. He is very good at it by now. He is not new at this, and you tonight are not the first tired sheep to come to the pool. You do not have to earn the pasture. You do not have to earn the water. You do not have to walk to the pool with any particular speed or any particular skill. You only have to be led. You only have to let yourself be held by the same care that arranged the grass and made the water still. Feel the small pool in front of you now in your imagination. Feel the water perfectly still. Feel the sky reflected in it, a dark blue and a few small stars. Feel the shepherd nearby, quiet, patient, not in a hurry. Feel your legs folding gently under you. Feel the green grass beneath your body. Feel the way even the mind at the edge of this pool cannot quite keep stirring because the water is already still and the stillness is contagious. Feel the way your breath begins to match the surface of the water, slow and even, without any effort. Lie down in the still water, rest in the green pasture. Settle into the peace of being led by someone who knows where the good grass is. Settle inside the grace of a pool that was dug for you long before you got here. Be still. Be still tonight. Be still in the way the small pool is still after the last ripple has left it. You are held. You are led. Your soul is being restored, and you are allowed to sleep as the sheep sleeps beside the water, without watching, without waiting, without needing to know what tomorrow will look like. There is one last image before the night is done, one last small picture to carry into sleep. There is one last image to carry into sleep tonight. It is not a story with characters. It is not a parable with a punchline. It is only a picture, a small, quiet picture that has been true in one form or another for as long as there have been chapels in the world. The picture is this. Somewhere tonight, in a small stone building, far from where you are, a candle is burning. It is not a large candle. It is a small votive in a rack against a stone wall. Someone lit it earlier today and then walked out and went home to bed. That person is now asleep, but the candle they lit is still burning. It is burning quietly in the dark, in a building where no one is watching it, and it will keep burning until the wax runs out. There is another candle burning tonight in a monastery on a hillside in a country you have never visited. A monk lit it before complying and then went to his cell. He is asleep now. He has been asleep for hours. The candle is still burning. No one in the monastery is watching it. It is burning for him, for the world, for everyone, for no one in particular. It does not matter that no one is watching. The flame does what flames do. It burns until it is finished. There is a candle in a small side chapel where a woman lit it that afternoon for her son. Her son is grown. He is 1,000 miles away. He does not know she was in the chapel. He does not know she stood in front of the small rack of candles and paid the coin for one and lit the wick with a long, thin match. He does not know she stood there for a while, quietly, not saying anything, only watching the flame catch. And then she left. She went home. She is asleep now, but the candle is still burning for him, and it will keep burning long after she is gone, as long as the wax lasts. There is a candle burning tonight in a small chapel in a mountain village where the priest is old and mostly deaf. He lit the candle before he went to bed. He lights one every night without failing because his own mother used to. He is asleep now. His breathing is slow. The candle is burning in the chapel down the road from his house in a small red glass in front of a picture of a woman with a blue cloak. The picture is faded. The chapel is empty. The candle is still burning. There is a candle in a Coptic monastery in a country of dry hills. It was lit by a young brother whose feet still hurt from the day's walk. He lit it and prayed for a village at the base of the mountain, a village whose name he did not know, but whose lights he had seen the night before. Then he went to sleep. The candle is still burning. It is burning for the village he does not know. There is a lamp burning in a small parish church on the outskirts of a village. There is a candle burning in the corner of a hospital chapel, where a nurse lit it during her break, and then went back to her rounds. There is a small oil light glowing beside a picture in a stranger's kitchen, in a country whose name you would not recognize. All of these small fires are burning right now, while you lie here, while you cannot sleep, while the mind is finally beginning to slow. You have not lit any of them. Most of them were lit by people you will never meet. Most of them were lit for reasons you will never know. Some were lit in gratitude. Some were lit in grief. Some were lit because it was simply what a person did after a hard day, before walking home in the dark. All of them are still burning. Each of them is very small. Together, they make a quiet net of light around the sleeping world. There is a comfort in this that is hard to explain in words. It is the comfort of the vigil not resting on you tonight. The comfort of someone else's small flame doing the work of remembering. The comfort of a chain of light that stretches back centuries, and that will stretch forward past you, and that does not depend on any one of us being awake to keep it going. Notice this. You do not have to be the one holding the light tonight. The light is already being held. It has been held by people you have never known, in buildings you have never been inside, in countries whose language you do not speak. Their candles are burning while you rest. Their vigil is covering yours. Notice too that the vigil has never actually stopped in the history of the world. At every hour of every night, somewhere on the planet, a small candle is burning in a small chapel. The sun goes around, the rooms change, but the small flames do not go out. There has been no night in a very long time when the world was fully dark. If you have felt alone in the dark, this is the picture to carry. You are not the only one awake tonight. But even more than that, you are not the only one keeping the light. There are thousands of small candles burning right now in your name, without knowing your name. There are prayers being spoken in old languages by people who fell asleep hours ago, and yet whose prayers are still in the air. There is a grace running through all of this that has been running for a very long time. You are held tonight by a chain of quiet fires. Some of them are in the past. Some of them are burning right now. Some of them will be lit tomorrow by people who do not know you, but who will pray for the tired anyway. Because that is what people who love do. The chain is unbroken. The chain has been unbroken for as long as there have been chapels, and you are a small link in it, whether you feel like one or not. You do not have to keep the candle burning tonight. You do not have to stay awake to watch it. You can lie down, you can close your eyes. The candles will keep burning. The vigil will keep. The old stones will keep the small fires going, without your help, until morning. That is the piece this last image hands you. A piece made of many small flames, none of them your own. Consider how many rooms tonight are quietly lit like this, not full of people, not full of noise, only full of small flames left by people who trusted that the flame would keep working after they had gone home. That is a kind of faith that does not require anyone to notice. That is a kind of care that does not need to be seen. That is what a candle in an empty chapel is doing. It is a small, stubborn act of hope in a room where no one is watching. You may not have known that so many small hopes were burning around the world tonight. You may not have known that so many strangers had left something warm in the dark for you. But they have. They have been doing this for centuries, and tonight is not different. Tonight is only one more night in the long line of nights when the candles have stayed lit. Feel the small chapel now in your imagination. Feel the rows of candles against the stone wall. Feel the warm amber light on the walls. Feel the smell of wax and old wood. Feel the way the room is empty and yet full, empty of people, full of the small fires people left behind before going home, full of the quiet grace of a place where prayer is always being made, even when no one is speaking. You are inside that room tonight without having to walk to it. You are inside its warmth. You are inside its stillness. You are inside its long chain of vigilance, and the vigilance is not yours to hold. Rest inside the small light. Rest inside the peace of not being alone in the dark. Rest inside the grace of a chapel where the candles are burning for you, whether you know their names or not. You are held, you are covered, you are prayed for, and you are allowed to sleep. You do not need to remember everything you heard tonight. If one small image stayed with you, let that be enough. Perhaps the boat on the water, perhaps the woman with the basket, perhaps the candle in the empty chapel. Any one of them is enough. And if nothing stayed, that is fine too. Some things settle into us without our knowing. Some things do their quiet work in the dark while we sleep. If you are still with us, thank you for staying. If you have already drifted off somewhere along the way, thank you for that too. Both are welcome here. Wherever you are right now, in whatever room, at whatever hour, you are welcome here, exactly as you are. Nothing about you needs to change tonight. You are held. Sleep well tonight deeply, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Chapel.